All right, let's walk through this released free response question. So we're creating a class for digits, and you can see that the primary instance variable we're going to be using is called digit list, and this is an array list of integer objects. And so this is going to be our container for each digit in our number. And it'll go into a separate spot on this array list. And then I assume we're going to be building some functions that allow us to test and manipulate this set of numbers. So when a number gets created, well, when one of these digit objects gets created, we pass it an integer, and then when the constructor gets created, in order for us to instantiate this D1 instance of a digit, we need to chunk each individual numeral into its own slot in digit list, which is, like we just looked at, the array list that we declare here as our private instance variable. So we just need to loop through and chop off each digit and add them into the number. And we want to make sure they get added in the correct order. Okay, so that's our first assignment. Alright, so we have a class here, and we have its constructor, which takes our parameter. Now, we've gone over this trick a little bit in class, but it's always good to remind you, if you want the singles digit on a number, you can get that really easily by saying my singles, my int singles digit is the remainder of, if I take num and get the modulus of 10. So if I were to try to divide it by 10, there would be a remainder, and that's whatever is in the singles digit. And that right there is whatever is in the ones place. And this is a trick so we can easily split the number into each digit. So that is the trick that we can use to get this spot. But that'll be in the wrong order. If we add them just using the regular .add command, it would add it in the wrong order. And before we go too far, we should add this here, and we should also initialize it. So that's declared in memory yet. It has not been instantiated yet. So we have to give it a time to create a new array list of integers and actually build it itself in heap memory. So at the outset, if we're going to be chopping this number up by the single spot, we'll know we're done when num is down to 0. So while num is greater than 0, we're going to keep this process up. So we know we want to loop, and we're going to keep on repeating this process as long as our num still has something for us to add into the digit list. Now what we can do is we can add the number that was in the single spot to the zeros position. And the reason why we do that is if every time we add the number into the 0 spot, then our singles digit will get shifted over as we chop each number and insert it. I'm sorry, this had to have add in there. I don't know why I missed that. But anyway, so you use the add function at the 0 position each time. It's an overloaded method, so if it just had a single parameter, it would just add that number to the very end, like an append function. But if you add 2 parameters, then the first parameter will be used as an index location as to where you want the number to be inserted, and everything else will automatically shift down as a result. So our trick still works, but we do need the .add function here. And then once we're done, then we'll divide that number. We'll set the number equal to its current value divided by 10. So that's divide equals 10, and that, because it's an integer, it doesn't store decimals, and so we'll add 4 into the 0 spot, and then chop off that number by dividing it by 10 and move everything down. And then we'll take the 0, and that will be inserted next after the 4, and the 4 will shift down 1 because of this command. And the second part of this assignment is to build is strictly increasing, which will analyze each digit to see if each numeral is larger than the numeral before. So this is true, and this is... Oh, okay. This is false because they can't be the same. It does actually have to increase. So also false, also false. Okay. So this shouldn't be too hard. So this structure should be familiar now. That if we want to check to see that a set of numbers or any sort of collection follows a certain pattern, we're going to loop through and check for that pattern. And if it passes, then we'll return true. But if we detected an abnormality, we'll stop and we'll return false. So we're going to have a loop that will go through digit list, and if we catch something wrong, we'll stop and return false, that it's not strictly increasing. But if it gets through the whole thing and we're satisfied, then we'll return true, that it passed. But in fact, since we're comparing two items in the same collection, let's stop one early. That's usually a trick, or to start one ahead. And that way you can do, you can look at where you're currently at 0 to start with, and then you can look one ahead. And that way, if I stop one before the end, that means that if I'm looking one ahead, I won't accidentally look off the edge of the list. So each time I need to check something. So, and if I find the abnormality, I will return false, which will exit me out of this loop and this method. So I need to check that my digit list, I need to get the item at X. But I also want to check it against the item X plus 1. And that X plus 1 definitely has to be bigger. So actually, the problem is if it wasn't bigger. If this is greater than or is equal to the one ahead of it, then this doesn't work. So digitList.get, and we'll do X plus 1. So we'll get the current number, and we'll get the one ahead of it by 1. And if this one is larger than or equal to, then it's not strictly increasing, return false. Otherwise, return true. And that's the whole assignment, so not too bad.